Hello world of YouTube and welcome to another episode of Redacted, the show where I take a look at albums that have a solid foundation but a spotty execution. And this month, we're staying a little more on brand. We're going to be talking once again about my favorite band, Nine Inch Nails. And as you may remember from my reformatted discography review,
I am planning a thing with these three releases. Spoiler for something happening down the line.
yes, this month I'm going to be pulling together and making a cohesive listen out of the very indebted to their style, but some would see as a flawed execution. That is their trilogy of Not the Actual Events, Ad Violence, and Bad Witch that I'm pulling together into a project that I'm going to call The Background World. Now before I get into the tracks that I decided to use and keep, I wanted to shout out a commenter from my discography review, Yumetoba, who in the comments they listed out not only how they'd ranked the discography, which was really nice to see, but they also went above and beyond with this project already and did their own redacted of it. Now, they provided a link to the track listing in that comment, but that link didn't work, so I can't see what songs they picked. But they also provided a Reddit post where they made their own album art, new album name, all that sort of stuff. And I just wanted to commend and respect the work that went into their own redaction. Now, they said they kept it at a still beefy 80-minute listen, so I can only imagine what they might have swapped out, if anything. And I decided to trim it a lot more. I cut it down to about 61 minutes, and this is actually the songs that I decided to keep. I decided to utilize a lot of the scrap songs as B-sides to singles and kind of come up with my own marketing campaign for this project. Now, in this version of the pre-album release, the album would probably come out a lot sooner, not only because it's not being marketed as 3 EPs, but because some of the ideas I would want to do would still have to fall in line with certain time frames. I would still have them be on Twin Peaks. I would still have them drop music videos for some of these songs, but I would have it in a frequency where it wouldn't feel cluttered, but it would feel very timely. But I would still release these songs in this order. I would start with Burning Bright to show something bold, something angry, something dark, in contrast to Hesitation Marks, which, while had its darker moments, was still a very, I don't want to say safe record, but it was a lot more electronically driven as a comeback record than, say, your average 2000s Nine Inch Nails project. And I would have the B-side to be that B, one of the songs I dropped, She's Gone Away, to provide this other sort of similar texture that is less abrasive. And then I would drop the video for Less Than and make that the next single or song to drop, and that would the B-side be Not Anymore, which is, again, a little more of an abrasive cut to contrast the synth-driven nature that feels like more of a safe single of Less Than. I ultimately scrapped that and She's Gone Away because I have songs with similar ideas or similar styles in my version of the record, and they just didn't fit whenever I tried to piece them together. Again, I went through many different iterations of this album. There was one where I had everything, there was some where I trimmed some stuff, and this is ultimately the trimming that I'm happy with. And the last single I would drop before the album comes out would be God Break Down the Door, to really keep listeners on their toes, because you have a really loud, abrasive, almost harsh song, followed by a little more of a safe Nine Inch Nails song, followed by a wonky jazz cut. It would be a great way to show that this album is going to be a lot more bold in direction than Hesitation Marks and provide a good contrast to that record. And its B-side, And its B-side would be I'm Not From This World, which, again, I really wanted to include on the record. I had it after Dear World in my original track listing, but again, I just had too many lengthy songs that I felt like bloated the track listing, and so I ultimately removed it and decided to make it a B-side to God Break Down the Door. Now, for my track listing that I kept, there was also a version that had Branches and Bones before Shit Mirror, and again, I felt like it just was better to cut to the chase and start with Shit Mirror. This album's already an hour long, and I felt like because there's so much going on, you got enough out of it with just this hour-long runtime. Now, to actually get to the track listing itself, I started it with Shit Mirror because I wanted to have just a bold, fast starter. You know, I originally had Branches and Bones before Shit Mirror, but I felt like it just made more sense to just start the album, start it on a fast note. And the album itself, if you look at the kind of the track listing itself and are familiar with the EPs, you can kind of see a pattern between the first half that bleeds into the second half. The centerpiece of this album to me is Over and Out and Burning Bright, because they embody both sides of the album, and while they're the point where they transition, they are almost on the opposite ends of the sonic ideas I was kind of intentionally splitting apart. You know, the first half from really Less Than through Over and Out, Shit Mirror is just a brash, razor sharp opener that has, yes, a fast drum line, but it could also fit in the second half. I just think it's a good starter to kind of kick the album out on a more traditional sound for Nine Inch Nails, and having Less Than follow that up is to kind of reaffirm that. Plus, it's a single that would have dropped conceivably in this version of the album, as did God Break Down the Door, just to have kind of 3 songs that are fast. They don't really give you a chance to breathe. They just keep going one after the other. The whole first half of the album is a lot more kinetically driven. You know, there's a lot more synthetic looping, a lot more of dance-type atmospheres. And that was intentional. And I wanted to have The Lovers be the first break of that, because it's a good lulling sound that still has some creepings and musings of something more sinister underneath. But I wanted to have kind of that be the first real breath of fresh air you get. Because this album was almost called The Lovers. I almost called this version of the album The Lovers with one of the track listings I had, because of it was the centerpiece of the album, but it still had this kind of erratic start. I just think that trimming it up and bringing it there made more sense before going into Dear World and Over and Out, which is one of the longer songs I kept, and I intentionally put it in the half to act as one of the centerpieces to the sound, you know, to be the apex of this kinetically driven sort of electronic loop-centric atmosphere. And it has a sound that kind of opens up a little more than The Lovers and Dear World do. Dear World and The Lovers have this idea of scope, but Over and Out is kind of the apex of that. It is the biggest those songs sound before this wave of noise assaults you with Burning Bright. I originally had Dear World fade into Burning Bright, and I still think it works really well, but I liked the idea of Over and Out fitting in between that. And then Burning Bright sets the tone for the second half of the record, where it's not going to lose a sense of hypnosis, but it's going to be a lot less kinetically driven. It's going to be a lot more pulled back as far as tempo is considered. It still has its faster moments like The Idea of You and Ahead of Ourselves, but outside of Ahead of Ourselves, they don't get as erratic as God Break Down the Door, or they don't get as consistently hypnotic as Over and Out or Dear World. They also retain Idea of You and Ahead of Ourselves, retain the idea of a lot more aggression, a lot more noise, a lot more harshness in the sounds, and that's why they are where they are. And I originally had a version that kept them together, but I like the idea of splitting them up and keeping the pace of the record a little more consistent. You know, so Burning Bright is this slamming, slower, monstrous song before bleeding into a faster, still pummeling song. The drums on The Idea of You are so forceful before toning it down a little bit, keeping it hypnotic with Play the Goddamn Part that has these brass, there's this kind of brass instruments just getting more harsh and kind of erratic as the song goes on before kind of retaining a sense of normalcy. You know, I feel like the second half of the record has this kind of burgeonings of anger and sinister creeping up more than in the first half. But it gets ramped up a little more with Ahead of Ourselves, the kind of unnerving nature, because it's a faster paced song that then reaches an apex before the album kind of gives you one more sense of serenity. I'm a big fan of that, if you couldn't tell by watching my Redacteds. I like the idea of something soft before, again, the loud, soft dynamic. I like the idea of a really erratic moment before something really soft happens, until you building up to a bigger climax to kind of to close the record. It is the climax before the resolution. And the background world is that resolution, because while Ahead of Ourselves bleeds into the softer moment continues into the background world, where the scope kind of raises even more so than in Over and Out. The sounds kind of get bigger. The synths, the synthetic synths that were kind of musings in earlier parts of the record are reintroduced here in a bigger presence before the loop happens. The second half of the background world happens, and the song just kind of melts away, and the album kind of melts away into the listener's ears. That was kind of the reason why I called the album The Background World, because I think if you're not going to make The Lovers the centerpiece, you should have this closer be this huge moment. And I love The Background World. I love a lot of the songs on this trilogy, but The Background World is a song that I keep revisiting because I love how big that song sounds and how intense that noise is that it builds to, and how much I love just the melting away of basically the song itself. It's kind of melting into nothingness. It's like casting it into the lava. And I think it's the best point that I could have ended this on. And with all of the different sounds and noises that go on this, it also made sense to call it The Background World, because there's a little bit of traditional Nine Inch Nails. There's a little bit of synth work. There's some jazz and a big presence in some of the percussion approach and some of the wonky styles in here. You know, I feel like if a band like Nine Inch Nails, which always speaks from an outsider's perspective, were to make an album about sonically sounds like a bunch of noise and a bunch of different aspects coming together, it would be called The Background World. And that's why I called it that. And that's my track listing. What do you think? If you enjoyed this, let me know. If you have a different Redacted of this album that you have, let me know that as well, because that's an interesting topic. Also, I did a request last month. I have another request on the docket that I'll be tackling in January. If you have an album that you think you would like to see me do on this segment, let me know in those comments down below. And if you like this video, if you like this Redacted, be sure to give it a like. I have linked in the description to a YouTube and a Spotify playlist for this album. Be sure to give it a spin. Let me know what you think of this redaction in those comments as well. But I'm going to get out of here. Thank you so much for watching. Again, like it if you like. If you want to see more of my music, gaming, and general nerdery content, be sure to subscribe. Special thanks to my patrons. If you would like to join their ranks, my Patreon is linked down in the description. I've been Viral Rack. You guys have good days, lives, and situations. And I'll see you another day!